everyone, and welcome to The Road Less Traveled, a special podcast series from the Better Satellite World, brought to you by Space and Satellite Professionals International. I'm Tamara Bond-Williams, Executive Director of SSPI. The Road Less Traveled series is where we feature the uncommon voices of space and satellite who challenge convention and ask us to think differently. In our prior episode, we spoke with a passionate young man who is building a coalition to put a cross on the moon. At least partially, he said, to lead people to Jesus Christ through space exploration. It's an intriguing and challenging notion, especially for the billions of people around the world who have different religious views and different understandings of His Holiness, Jesus, the Christ. What intrigues me about that conversation most is something else that he said. He said, as we go out into the cosmos, we're going to take our culture with us. As humanity intensifies its relationship with space through scientific exploration, expanding commercial ventures, satellite infrastructures, technological advancements, and preparation for potential habitation, we face critical, ethical, spiritual, and cultural questions. What values and principles must guide humanity's interaction with, journey through, and use of space and space technologies? How can we ensure inclusivity, equity, and ecological responsibility as we shape our shared space environment? How do we bring those aspects of our respective and collective culture with us that ensure that humanity succeeds and flourishes in space? Today, our distinguished panelists will explore these themes through distinct yet complementary perspectives. But before I introduce them, I'd like to take a moment to thank our corporate partners, Access Intelligence, producers of Via Satellite Magazine, Hughes and EchoStar Company, the American Space Exploration Fund, and Clyde & Company, law firm here in the United States and in London. And now, our distinguished guests. Dr. Chris Impey is a University Distinguished Professor of Astronomy at the University of Arizona and an internationally recognized educator, researcher, and science communicator. His work spans cosmology, astrobiology, and science education, and he's offered over 450 scientific publications and 10 popular science books exploring the origins, structure, and future of the universe. Chris is particularly engaged in questions about humanity's place in the cosmos and the scientific, philosophical, and ethical frontiers of space exploration. Welcome, Chris.
Yeah, good to be with you.
Thank you. Dr. Claire Nelson is a global futurist, sustainability engineer, and social entrepreneur, recognized by Forbes as one of the world's top 50 female futurists. She is the author of Smart Futures for a Flourishing World and serves as a board member of World Future Studies Federation and a Goodwill Ambassador for UN International Moon Day. As convener of the Space Futures Forum and an advocate for inclusive, sustainable space policy, Dr. Claire calls for a profound rethinking of humanity's engagement with space as a shared and ethical endeavor. Welcome, Dr. Claire.
Thank you.
And finally, Frank White, a name you know because he's been with us before. Frank is a Rhodes Scholar, author, and space philosopher best known for the Overview Effect, Space Exploration, and Human Evolution, a seminal work that continues to shape conversations about humanity's relationship with space. In addition to his influential writing on space, SETI, AI, and climate change, he serves as president of the Human Space Program and co-executive editor of Sentient Media. Frank's work challenges us to rethink our cosmic future with an emphasis on ethics, consciousness, and the interconnectedness of life. Frank, welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you all. And I'm excited to be kicking off this conversation. So what I wanted to do is just kind of launch this conversation by giving you each a chance to kind of tell us a little bit about how you orient yourself around this conversation. So if you would, in just a couple of moments, offer your brief personal mission statement around this question. What is the core idea or motivation informing your approach to engagement with space and space technologies?
Any particular order? No.
No particular order, but since you spoke up, you first.
Okay. So I believe that exploration is built into our DNA. You know, humans left Africa and traveled the world in an amazingly short amount of time, occupying all the continents, not like animals do to mate or for food sources. We just did it out of curiosity. We didn't have to go all those places. So going to space is an extension of that. But it's a very unnatural environment. So my perspective is that this is not something we have to do or need to do. It's something we're a little driven to do. And because we're in the process of not taking care of our own planet, we therefore have an extra obligation to not go into these new realms of space and do the same things we did to our planet. We should learn from our history when we take this new adventure into space. So that's my sort of framing idea.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Claire, I see you thinking it through.
I think my approach is sort of governed by the thought. My question I asked about maybe 15 years ago was like, how do we share the future? The future as shared space. And I had come across this book, which was written, I can't remember when, but it was written by a gentleman who used to work at the World Bank. It was like High Noon, 20 global challenges and 20 years to solve them. And at the time, we're just beginning to think about the Global Sustainable Development Goals. And I remember looking at his book and saying, oh my God, this is one of the most exciting ways of thinking that I've ever come across. And I sort of adopted that approach, just asking a question, except I kind of changed it around slightly. And he had these 3 questions: was how you share the planet, how you share humanity, and how you share the rule book. I really thought his approach was just the way he expressed the question. I remember thinking, oh my Lord, this is such a great way of thinking, except it doesn't cover everything. He has not looked into the future, because really 20 years to solve them, but the 20 years in the future will be very different from what we're solving now. So maybe the question should be how we share the future. And then if we talk about how we share the planet, it's not just the planet anymore, because we're already thinking about space. So how will we share space? And that's when I remember consciously thinking about that our current way of looking at space exploration demanded a new approach, demanded us asking some different questions. We already, as Chris Impey said, we already had sort of living beyond our means here on the planet Earth. And I thought, we can't do space, we do Earth, like the way we have done Earth. We really can't go forward in that. And so once I saw that the Global Sustainable Development Goals had expressed that space was responsible or could be used for every single one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, I kind of intellectually assumed that there was a 18th goal in my head, and that was ensuring that we did space correctly and we did space in a sustainable way. So that is the way I've sort of jumped in and informed the way I've looked at this question going forward.
Thank you so much. Okay, over to you, Frank.
Well, I totally agree with Dr. Claire and Chris. And, building on what they said, I would say my personal mission statement has been pretty much the same for 40 years. And it is to share the overview effect with everyone that I possibly can. It's evolved into the idea of bringing the overview effect down to Earth. And the image behind me is a classic example of the overview effect. It's a view of the Earth as seen from orbit or the moon or even on a suborbital hop. And it tends to produce a conscious change in attitude on the part of those who have this experience. So I totally agree that we really need to improve life on Earth. And I think we can do that through a shift in awareness. But then that has to be the foundation for how humanity evolves into the solar system. And part of what grew out of my work on the overview effect is the Human Space Program. That's a nonprofit organization. We have the mission of supporting the sustainable, ethical, and inclusive evolution of humanity into the solar ecosystem. So those two missions are really one. they all go together, and I think the real way to state it is evolution into the rest of the solar ecosystem, because Earth is part of the solar system, and we can't leave it behind, and we shouldn't leave it behind. It's an integral part of our future.
Very well said. Okay, I I sent you all a list of questions, and of course, I'm already going off script, so forgive me in advance. But you all have articulated what sounds to me like a very holistic viewpoint, and and echoing in the three statements that you've made is this reckoning with the current state of humanity on our current planet right now, right? We are at varying degrees of recognizing that we actually should take care of our home planet. We are at varying degrees of we're actually in very many places around the world, we're at war with one another, right? So this is humanity today. This is where we live. And so, Frank, I was intrigued, right? Because just for the fun of it, and behind me is the USS Cerritos. I'm sitting on the bridge of a Star Trek cartoon ship. So, but there's an old idea from Star Trek that humanity should get its act together before it ventures out into the planet outside of its current planetary system, and you're articulating this idea that the overview effect would help humanity, if I'm hearing you correctly, would help humanity get its act together. Can you talk a little bit more, because is it a chicken and egg kind of a situation, or what is the situation?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that I think the idea of getting our act together before we venture outward is an understandable concept, and it's built on this fear that the behavior that's characterized life on Earth for humanity will just continue. The theory that I'm advancing is that, number one, this experience of the overview effect could, if enough people have the experience, shift our behavior on Earth, but also shape our behavior off Earth. It's a theory, it's yet to be proven. And my original notion of the overview effect had nothing to do with astronauts, interestingly enough. It was imagining what it would be like to live permanently on the moon, or in an O'Neill community, or in some other way live off of the Earth. And I felt that if you saw the Earth in the sky every day, you would just know it's a whole system. Everything is interconnected. Everything is interrelated. It wouldn't be an idea to be understood. It would just be part of your consciousness. And I believe that people living off the planet would, without a great deal of effort, have a different ethic, different philosophy, and different behavior. It's a theory yet to be validated, you know?
Yeah.
So, but that's my answer. And I just would do an addendum. I don't think it's realistic to say we should get our act together before we move off the planet. We're moving off the planet now. There's a lot of momentum in that direction. Going back to what Chris said, there are going to be people who go off to explore, and they really won't be able to give you a reason. They're going to do it. As one astronaut said to me in my interviews for the book, we're going to explore outer space no matter what any government or anybody says about it. So I think we should shape the reality that we're in right now rather than hope that somehow we could become overnight, be different before we do this exploration.
Okay. Chris, you've also examined critically humanity's return to the moon. We're obviously making a very strong push for that. Well, we're making a push for that. I don't know how strong it is anymore. But highlighting geopolitical rivalry and our inefficiencies. How do you envision a more ethical and inclusive and responsible, especially scientifically responsible approach to our lunar exploration?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Frank. This is going to happen anyway, whether we like it or not. But the obligation to at least try and do it in a sustainable way is important. And the problem is, of course, the drivers historically and now have been government. The first venture to the moon was a geopolitical pissing contest between the world's two superpowers at the time. It wasn't driven by exploration or anything altruistic. And now we have, billionaires with boy toys that are, dreaming of conquering space. So the modulation and framing of that in a more healthy way is lagging behind. The United Nations has a working committee that's trying to work towards agreements about sustainable space exploration, about not cluttering up the Earth environment with debris, about not contaminating planets and places that we visit with our biological detritus or whatever. But those are very slow. They work on UN timescales, decades. There's only ever been 2 space treaties, and they were a long time ago, and they didn't talk about ownership beyond governments, and that's not what we're looking at now. We're talking about private ownership and companies. So there's some work to do to just catch up with setting a framing of this that is healthy and can pull people into the enterprise, because they will just feel excluded since hardly anyone in our lifetimes is going to go off Earth. It's still a tiny number of people. Less than 700 people have been in Earth orbit still. 20 times more people have stood on Mount Everest. So we need to sort of regroup and try and put a foot forward that says, well, okay, let's do this in a sensible way. And I kind of worry that the regulatory environment is a Wild West. I live in the Wild West, and it is a Wild West. So that's sort of my concern at the moment.
Yeah. And when you say Wild West, of course, what comes to my mind is just that it's the law of the strong man, right? Who's strong enough to enforce the law? And that person makes the law, and whatever that person's values are or not is what we get. And yet, when I think about the environment of space, one of the conversations we've had in a different series is just that the nature of it is that the people with the ability to create space are the strong men, right? Right now, it's either government or billionaires. And so there's not a lot of room for an egalitarian or posture, nor have we yet seen that our governments play nicely together. We still seem to operate on a kind of an axis of we're on this side and we're on this other side. And so who governs the Wild West in that case? I'm not sure there's an answer to that question, by the way. I'm just reacting to what you just said. Well, let me push this. Let me push this over to Dr. Claire. Dr. Claire, one of the things that you said to me when we were talking before is that we need a new covenant with the cosmos, and which I thought was just I like the word covenant. I like the word covenant a lot because it's very personal, at least to me. And so, what did you mean by that? And can that give us some insight into how to engage this Wild West environment that we're entering?
First, let me just say that before I met Frank, I had the overview effect experience in my spirit because I was so obsessed with, are we going to really make the SDGs? If we're in danger of self-destructing, and the signals are all there, and having met some of the people who are part of the Lifeboat Foundation, I'm somewhere on their list of scientists who supposedly are thinking about these things. There's obvious that many people understand that we actually are at a point in human history where we can self-destruct. As a New Thought Christian, I had previously sort of ignored the book of Revelation, saying, "Oh, this is pure old people foolishness," and it just dawned on me one day that maybe Revelations wasn't so much prophecy; it was more of a cautionary tale. And that perhaps from when you look at put things together and you see things pop up in your subconscious, like, Homo Deus, for example, we have become godlike. We have now the opportunity, we can splice the gene, we can clone things. We're now, furthering our search for intelligent life beyond our borders, and we keep on pushing further and further into the cosmos. But at the same time, we have this very primitive behavior that kept us in this loop, a kind of terrible loop of fighting wars over what? Because when you look at that beautiful blue marble behind Frank, you recognize there are no borders and there are no boundaries. And then in one of my sermons many years ago, I was doing a comparative thing on the golden rule. And I could find a similar principle in almost every religion that has some variation of the golden rule. And I thought, this is really so cool. So I go to a church where I'm sitting beside people who are of different faiths, interfaith practice. And I like to say we might be very small, but we certainly are we hold deeply into the belief that the fact that you are, a Buddhist beside me, or a Wicca or a Yoruba beside me in the same pew, doesn't make you any less than. We're all part of this creation that we're still seeking to understand. After all, the universe is still expanding. Then I thought about our current place in space and where we are in terms of our cultural space, and the fact that so much of the way the global systems are designed are based on a rule book that comes out of the Abrahamic faiths, and also the rule book that says, capital is paramount, and this idea of personal property and private property. And it dawned on me that if we're going to move this paradigm shift as we are now, as opposed to waiting until we get our act together, then one of the spaces we have to get talking about this is the interfaith community. The community of people had already gone through some internal shift to recognize that their way to God is not the only way. And there are enough people around the world that believe in a religion, right? An organized religion, that even if they don't go to church, they still believe in that religion, church or temple or mosque or whatever. They still believe in that religion. So my question was, well, what if I could get the authorities in those organizations to put this on the table? Don't have it be just a talk for like the scientists and the telescope makers and the rocket scientists. But what if I could get people to talk about this? So hence was born my sort of a current one-woman mission to create a new covenant for the cosmos. I said this one woman for the time being because I haven't talked about it. There's no organized even working group as yet. But I feel that the steps I'm making, working now as an analog astronaut, now that I'm actually serving as a goodwill ambassador for the International Moon Day, I have these moments now. I'm entering the different spaces. I'm actually also advisor to Shaktisat, which is a global project to teach girls how to program a satellite to circumvent the moon. So there's enough spaces I'm in that if I can see these ideas, eventually I'll find people of each faith that want to have this conversation, and then I'll have the inter-spiritual working group I need to move this forward. And certainly I've been working assiduously, and the mission continues. Every International Human Fraternity Day, which is February 4th, I've been doing a series of conversations with people of different faiths, beginning to see the idea. So that's where I am with this mission, but I take it very seriously, that if we can get the preachers and the pundits and the pandits and the rabbis to have this conversation from the pulpit, right, we may be able to get some work done in changing people's minds.
Yeah. Okay. I have to do a little bit of positionality here, just to let everybody know where I come from. Of course, I am the executive director of SSPI, so that's one positionality, but also I am a Baha'i by faith. And so the idea of the oneness of humanity is core to my own belief system. And so I'm listening to this conversation. I am, of course, deeply sympathetic to the idea that, hey, can we prioritize humanity thinking of themselves as one thing? But one of the other things, though, that it seems is that the idea of space exploration has always been a catalyst, right? It's a driver to human achievement so that we can start thinking of ourselves as one thing because we have a really big thing to accomplish, like, create our pathway to space, or even create the mechanisms whereby we all can participate. It's a huge undertaking. And Chris, I'm hearing you loud and clear when you talk about the very, very small number of humans who've actually had any opportunity to leave the planet. And even these, amazing efforts, Space for Humanity and others who like, hey, we want to send people off the planet. It's still a big undertaking, right? It's expensive, it's hard. People have health issues why they can't leave. There's so much that we haven't figured out yet, that it can't get bigger. So let me just ask the question, and Dr. Claire's articulated one point of view, one possible way forward, which is to engage the faith communities into reflecting on what does it mean to be space engaged, to be engaged with space as a humanity. But what is a way that we can bring space home, right? Because this overview effect, Dr. Claire said she experienced it without going out to space, right? I have an understanding of Earth as a homeland because that's my own faith tradition. There are astronauts who didn't have that point of view, but they gained that point of view through the overview effect. But overall, it seems that what we want to do is have humans grasping the value and importance of space, and they're placing it as part of humanity. And I'm not sure how we get there rapidly so that we can actually have the kind of impact that we're hoping to have, so that we don't create the wild, wild west, right? So what do we think? How do we get there? I'm going to throw that to you, Frank.
Okay. Well, I think we get there by doing what the three of us are doing. And also you, I mean, by holding this meeting of us, everybody can play a role. And Dr. Claire is focusing on faith traditions and bringing them to understand the importance of this paradigm shift that we're talking about, and that it can be a paradigm shift that different faiths can embrace. I was at a dinner, Chris, about 5 years ago, where we were talking about the overview effect and how to spread the word and have this transition. And one of the people there said, well, we kind of have what you're talking about already, this kind of unity of thinking and approaching things. It's called science. And science transcends borders. Scientists have a common language and a common paradigm. And my point is that I think everybody can start where they are to share this insight that we are one, and that we need to see ourselves as a species. We're not really very good at that. We don't really think that way. And the final thing I would say is that one of the key notions that comes home for astronauts is that we're on a spaceship. We're in space. We've always been in space. We'll always be there. And I interviewed Sarah Sabri, who flew on Space for Humanity flight. I interviewed her before and after the flight, and I said, Sarah, what changed for you? And she said, I think what changed for me is that there's no difference. Earth and space, there's no difference. It's all a continuum. And we need to stop thinking of a division between the two. So the answer to your question, I believe, is everybody shares their understanding of this new paradigm where they are, you know? I just want to say one final thing. Yes, only 700 people have left the planet. Many, many more people are experiencing the overview effect through virtual reality or listening to podcasts and so on. But we should never doubt the ability of one or two or three people to change the paradigm. I mean, you know, we have Jesus, we have Buddha, we have Galileo, we have Kepler. It always starts with one or two or three people when a fundamental change happens in the mindset of humanity. So where we are right now is where other movements have begun in the past.
Chris, I think you were popcorned on that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so I think a useful thing for us in this stage of the space experiment is to find some gritty, practical benefits, because it sort of dichotomizes into the sort of lofty, vision of the Earth spinning through space and we're all on it and there are no boundaries and so on, and the more practical, realpolitik of superpowers rivaling each other and billionaires with their own motivations beholden to no one except maybe their shareholders. So we need some middle ground here to pull more people in. And I'll just suggest one thing. I'm not saying it's a huge part of it, but one benefit of living off Earth, living on the moon, say, is these are very inhospitable environments, and the act of living in such an inhospitable environment means you have to live parsimoniously. You have to self-contain. You have to recycle everything. You have to live off the land. You'll be mining the lunar soil and getting water out of it. You'll be getting oxygen to breathe. You'll be making rocket fuel out of it, and so on. So, I mean, that's not a substitute for sustainability on the Earth, where we clearly have a long way to go. But I'd say it's a sort of collateral benefit of the act of trying to live off Earth, is that we can only do it if we have an extremely efficient, parsimonious footprint, energy footprint, and footprint into this inhospitable world that doesn't really want us there. And that we can bring back home. So these are pioneer prototyping technologies that, if they're produced at scale, could really benefit large numbers on the home planet.
I have to smile at that. I was watching a YouTube video, kind of idly watching, and it was the topic was, I think, 20 forgotten sandwiches or something like that. It was bizarre. Anyway, there were all kinds of really amazing things. And I actually grew up with some of them. I grew up eating Spam, and I also grew up with Tang. And I was like, yeah, right. These were scarcity and astronaut things that we did. And Dipping Dots is popular these days. And so, I think, you've got a point that the few people who do something so inspiring as live on the moon, their mechanisms for living will certainly make their way back home to Earth. So that's an interesting thought. Anyway, I'm going to shift gears because you were mentioning some of the popular things, and I want to bring this to a very concerning level before we wrap up. But obviously, we're at this moment now where we are actually, despite this grand vision of going into space, and we are in fact already in space in lots and lots of ways. But thus far, our mechanism of entering space has been profoundly wasteful. I'm not sure that we had an understanding when we first started, and this is always the case, of how impactful our waste would be. But we're now here, right? We are living under the threat of a Kessler syndrome, right? So now that we're here, what can we bring to our collective understanding that gives us the will to deal with it? How do we have the will, right? Because we struggle here on Earth where we can see, if we only walk, several blocks to the east or to the west, it's easy to see the impact of irresponsible waste management, for instance. We now have this crisis in our orbit around us, and all our lofty ideals could go to naught if we're not careful. So how do we bring that awareness and will to the rest of humanity? Claire, I'll bring that to you.
I'm going to jump in and say perhaps is learning to telling more stories and telling different stories and having more people telling the story. I think that we have, by and large, as scientists and engineers, been talking a lot to ourselves, and people are in their little movements. So it's a women's movement and the climate movement and the green movement, and they have all these different movements. They have this plethora of movements. And in my book, I talk about, movementology being its own. It's a good thing, but it also has become a negative thing, right? But we've got to do some cross and transboundary work. We've got to get people to see that they're more than one thing. First of all, that we have to get out of this mindset that many of us have been trained into, that, oh, I'm only an engineer. But that engineering body that you carry also experiences the moon at night, or experiences the joy of looking at a flower. So in some ways, you're also, and quote unquote, benefited from this beautiful environment without calling yourself an environmentalist. And this came to me one day when I was watching a movie about the whales being beached, and I found myself weeping, and not just weeping like, polite tears. It was a copious bawling. And I realized, but what's happening to me? I'm not an environmentalist. And I'm like, you idiot, but you're weeping though. I recognized that something in me had shifted. Because I don't know anything about the sea, but I'd had fallen in love with the whales and was distressed that they were being destroyed. And I think that many people are going through that right now, when the people who have these movements, such as the Earth Overshoot Day, which seem to be a fringe movement. More of us who know about these things have to bring them into our conversation, our natural conversation. I actually am practicing this philosophy of paradigm shift based on a research paper I read, that it said that Rensselaer Polytechnic had done research, and they came upon this number that says that if you get 11% of the community that you're trying to shift believing the same vision of the future, then you can now shift the mindset. So everything I do kind of is based on these numbers. I'm calculating, okay, if I want to get the people to move or youth to move, where am I going to find young people? One of the things I'm doing now to actually activate that is in my work to build out an analog space community in Africa, having launched this thing in Kenya. And one day in desperation, because I'm doing it with no money, right? So one day in desperation, I'm saying, how am I going to find people when I have no money, no budget? And I went, oh my, I know who. The Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts. There's a whole body of young people who are just waiting to be filled. So I've already began that journey, and I have one Girl Guides movement of Kenya has signed on to help build out this platform. And so just by now having this one group, I can imagine now reaching across Girl Guides and Girl Scouts in America and Canada, talking about this on Moon Day and begin to have the conversation about what does it mean? So I'm already plotting, having been invited here. I hadn't thought about doing the cultural and this part of it, but maybe I can sneak it into their research. I can sneak it in their research about as they plan for this colony on the moon, because guess what? The World Space Week happens to have as a theme living in space. Now, what a joyous moment of, harmonious things coming together. And so I think those of us who are about trying to be intentional about change making have to use every little thread of opportunity that comes our way to just begin to weave it together to create this new story, and always focus on what is the vision, the story we're trying to share. We want to have more people believe in the possibility that 1,000 years from now, people will be looking out at the stars and we'll be able to see them. And therefore, to do that, we have to hold ourselves in check today and focus on the vision we want, and then talk about then how do we fix what's wrong. So that's the approach I'm using, and I'm hoping I can get more people to see the beauty of sharing stories of our aspirations as a way to help move in that direction.
Dr. Claire, I've got to thank you for that. The idea of storytelling is something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm a very poor storyteller, but I do definitely believe in it. And it's very powerful. It's very powerful to be able to articulate in a way that builds vision, So I really appreciate that. And you've also reminded me that I left out a whole piece of the conversation I wanted to have. We just didn't have enough time. It was an overambitious meeting, but gosh, I'm so grateful to the three of you for having such a robust conversation. I want to give everybody a chance to say one last thing. We're over time, so I want to be also respectful. So if everybody could just say one last thing, what would you like for our audience to take from this conversation? If you had one thing that you wanted to tell them, so I'll start off with you, Chris.
I think it's not out there and other and nothing to do with you. I think everyone on the planet, is a member of this spaceship that's traveling through space. So you just have to project yourself outward. It's a calming thing given the turmoil of the world to do this. So I recommend doing that.
Thank you. Frank?
I'd like to build on what Chris said. If you imagine or you live in the metaphor that we're on a spaceship Earth, one of the things that astronauts say and other advocates say is that we're the crew members of Spaceship Earth. We're all astronauts in that sense. There are no passengers on this spaceship. So yeah, everybody has a role. Everybody is a crew member, and a lot of what needs to happen is you need to find out what your task is as a crew member, what appeals to you as part of this beautiful organic spacecraft we're on.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to just wrap that up by saying, yes, it is true. So on Spaceship Earth, there are no passengers, we're all crew. And so as crew, we recognize that the cosmos do not belong to us. We belong to the cosmos.
Very true.
Thank you so much. And with that, I am going to wrap it up. We are, like I said, over time, but this conversation could have gone on easily another hour. So I really thank you for the time that you spent with me today, and I'm certain that our audience will enjoy it. Once again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. That concludes this episode of The Road Less Traveled. Heaven help us, grappling with the faith and ethics of space and technology. As we conclude this second season of The Road Less Traveled, I want to pause for a bit of gratitude and reflection. First, a A special thank you to Lou Zaccarillo, who conceived this series and served as guest host for 2 of this season's episodes. His insightful conversations expanded our horizons and enriched the journey immensely. Lou, thank you for your thoughtful exploration of our guests' journeys that has truly illuminated the less traveled paths of our industry. And I want to thank our extraordinary guests for this season of The Road Less Traveled: Joanne Higgins, Amanda Lee Falkenberg, Justin Park, Dr. Chris Impey, Dr. Claire Nelson, and Frank White. Thank you for courageously sharing your stories and inspiring us to think differently about space, satellites, and our place in the cosmos. So, what did we learn on this journey? We learned that the road less traveled is only made visible because of the more widely traveled roads. One is not better than the other. Both are essential avenues of learning. The heroes in Joanne Higgins' moonshot story, her father and his peers, fought for access to that widely traveled road. Their struggles, obstacles, and heroism carved out the exception, making the road a little wider for those who would come after them. Amanda Lee Falkenberg's musical gift opened an unexpected door to the sciences. Her work illuminates the natural convergence of science and art, 2 widely traveled roads that, when they meet, give us new ways to see and feel the universe. Justin Park is blazing a trail that some may find alienating, others inspiring. His quest to bring faith into the context of space exploration invites us to ponder serious questions. How do we orient ourselves in the cosmos? What happens to our sense of place, of the sacred, when we are far away from the resting places of our ancestors? Even the thought process behind Justin's effort is worthy of deep consideration. For those of us who geek out contemplating the implications of Qiblas from space, and who ask what happens when we lose the sense of groundedness and place that comes from mere access to the bones of our ancestors, his work invites us into essential reflection. And in our final episode, this episode with Dr. Chris Impey, Dr. Claire Nelson, and Frank White, we saw the strands of faith, ethics, and science begin to weave together into a triple helix. Something new will emerge when all 3 strands contribute. That's the lesson. The road less traveled must find its intersections with the more widely traveled roads. In their meeting, both will be transformed. So, I invite you to listen to the entire series of The Road Less Traveled. There are stories here that will challenge you, open you up, and perhaps lead you to those intersections where familiar paths and bold new roads come together to create something we haven't even imagined yet. Thank you all for traveling this road with us. Until next season, let's keep exploring, questioning, and seeking the extraordinary. And with that, don't forget to subscribe to the SSPI podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and even YouTube. SSPI's corporate partners, Access Intelligence, Clyde & Company, Hughes, and the American Space Exploration Fund, along with our corporate and individual members, make all that we do at SSPI possible. Thank you. You can find us on Twitter at SSPI, as well as on LinkedIn and Facebook. As a matter of fact, I think you can find us on Instagram now. For Space and Satellite Professionals International, our producer Ari Yates, and for the global space and satellite industry that makes the difference in all of our endeavors, I'm Tamara Bond Williams. Thank you for listening.